Welcome to Night's Watch discussion. Our focused film this afternoon will be The Sandlot. All right, so any particular place the group would prefer to start?
Main characters, relationship with the stepdad was interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Scotty, observations?
He really was pretty desperate for his approval. Scotty didn't seem very interested much at all in anything about him, really.
Yeah.
I thought the way the mother handled it was interesting too.
Sorry, sidebar. Do we know what happened to his actual dad?
I don't know if we do.
It wasn't mentioned, right?
No, I even looked it up
Okay.
on the fandom page.
He died when he was young.
He died.
He did die. Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Do we know how young?
Yeah.
He was 6.
Yeah, he
6.
Like he died when he was young.
Yeah. What we don't know is Scotty's affect since the death compared to the remarriage and the move, right? So this might be a persisting complex bereavement disorder, which means that if we were to make the prequel, we would have Scotty's current signs and symptoms incident to the death of a loved one, his father's death at age of 6. On the other hand, if that is not the case, and we actually see this incident to the move to their current town, what is high in your differential at that point? So asymptomatic up until the time of the move, at which time we have an onset of symptoms consistent with dysphoria and perhaps related symptoms.
Adjustment.
Yeah. Adjustment disorder comes in 3+ varieties. So this depressed mood, anxious affect, and behavioral disturbance or conduct, or a combination of the above. So something to consider here. Here, I don't really. I mean, Scotty might be anxious, but I see more dysphoria than I actually see anxiety. But it's definitely worth noting and worth asking Scotty about if he were to present the clinical attention. Again, all of the above is completely normal. He's a new kid, right? It's tough. But there might be aspects of this film which allows us to move off that initial stance and consider that this is behavior that is outside a culturally sanctioned norm. And if that is the case, then maybe an adjustment disorder to begin our discussion, depression or depressed mood, anxiety or disturbance of conduct or some combination. I don't really see any disturbance of conduct, but per the American Psychiatric Association, per the DSM, you could have a combination of the above. Let's say that we were able to contribute to the script of the prequel, which is the next movie that's out, right? That's not true, but that's always good to pretend that we're not going to become physicians, but instead movie producers, because it's probably funner and more lucrative. All that stated, you do want to inform the film and have it to be evidence-based. So what aspects of the bereavement would you highlight to develop this narrative that in current day, Scotty is probably struggling with a primary mood disorder? So again, the question is, if you were writing the prequel, how would you develop this character to ensure that he remains depressed when he moves and we see the Sandlot?
Highlight the closeness of the relationship he had with his previous father.
Mm-hmm. That's probably a good start, right? What else?
Maybe change a little bit of the social factors around him, like make it more like a higher risk of like going into depression or experiencing depressive episodes.
Right, and somebody made a comment about the biological mother's reaction to this. We might want to develop that more and have her be unsupportive in the prequel. And whether we're struggling or we're looking at the absence of a protective factor or the incidence of a risk factor, we could definitely inform the plot so that we heighten the risk. Well, this is fictional, so we get to actually talk like this. As clinicians, we would do the direct opposite, right? Any other thoughts here?
Maybe like struggling in school or acting out for
Yeah.
a longer amount of time.
So as from an earlier age, we want to see some clinical significance. We want to see some impaired, in this case, scholastic or academic functioning. Yep, exactly right. Yep. What if at that time, that is during the time of the prequel, Scotty presented to you, and one of the things that the medical students presented to you were signs and symptoms upon the initial assessment that seemed to be coinciding with post-traumatic stress disorder or acute stress disorder. There's two things that might come to mind here. So again, it's the prequel. It's a younger Scotty Smalls. And we're talking about potential risk factors for developing a major depressive episode later on in age, i.e. during the Sandlot. I think the year's about 1962. All right, so this is previous to that. And during that initial interview, the medical student signs out to you or presents to you symptoms that are suggestive of post-traumatic stress or acute stress disorder. What comes to mind there?
Variability.
Nightmares?
No, yeah, I mean, and upon discussing the specific signs and symptoms, what clinical thoughts do we have to entertain in terms of formulating what might be going on? Well, one is straightforward, and it's more from the director-producer role, and that is you might want to include something about his discovering the body, right, in terms of the plot, right? So getting back to the original question. But beyond PTSD and acute stress disorder per se, there is a mood disorder that incorporates those similar symptoms. And on your self-exam, the single best answer would be what? So somebody with a primary mood disorder, but inclusive of symptoms that are consistent with or shared with acute or post-traumatic stress disorder. Persisting complex bereavement disorder. And what is persisting complex bereavement disorder compared to bereavement?
It's longer, it's like greater than 12 months.
Right? Hence persisting. Right? Complex meaning that not only quantitatively does it differ, but qualitatively as well. It's complex meaning that those symptoms are much more complicated than just a reaction of dysphoria to the death of a loved one. And those are qualified as PTSD-like symptoms. And why in the world would we even consider adding this to the script of a prequel? What does the evidence-based literature suggest? What relevance is there that is likely to come up on a shelf exam? That unlike bereavement, which could actually be a stressor, a precipitant of a major depressive episode, persistent complex bereavement disorder is actually an independent risk factor for future depression. So that's something to consider. Questions about bereavement, persistent complex bereavement disorder, adjustment disorder? Before we leave this conversation focusing on Scotty Smalls, what is adjustment disorder? We talked briefly about the types, but I didn't hear the rest of the definition. So you're going to come into a discussion room after seeing a patient, and you're going to talk about how the patient's current mood, their depression, their dysphoria, is an adjustment to a stressor, which fits the diagnosis perfectly. And then you're going to try to sell me on the idea as the attending on the case that not only is it an adjustment to, but it's a direct consequence of. And I'm going to ask, well, how do you know that? And what are you going to look for on your board vignette now?
Maybe any behavioral symptoms regarding when the stressors talk about or anything.
More specific, you're on the right track.
Timeline?
More specific, you're on the right track. What is the specific timeline that defines adjustment disorder? How do you operationalize cause and effect here?
There's a lack of symptoms beforehand.
Definitely, right? So the onset of, in this case, it's depression. is incident to an identified stressor, right? But within what time frame? Because if you tell me, listen, they actually endorsed depression, and his father died.
Within 3 months of the stressor, lasting for less than 6 months.
Perfect, right? You have to remember those numbers, right? So after the acute stressor terminates, the symptoms, in this case, the dysphoria, would not continue or will not continue for 6 months post-termination of that stressor. Now, in real life, the stressor is often complicated or complex and not acute. Usually they're enduring, but hopefully to test your understanding of the definition, the board is not going to put that complicated case in a shelf vignette. 3 and 6 months are definitely the timelines that you're going to have to remember. Questions about bereavement, persistent complex bereavement disorder, adjustment disorder. Additional observations on Scotty Smalls.
He also wants to fit in with the group, the baseball group, and throughout the movie he doesn't know who Babe Ruth is, and he kind of fakes that he does, and he's always wanting to fit in with them.
Mm-hmm. No doubt. Initial impression there?
Normal childhood.
Thank you. That was a bait. Yep. No doubt. That's perfectly normal. Yep. Now it gets some folks into some trouble because not knowing who Babe Ruth is, he actually uses a signed autograph ball, which is where the first time I watched that, I had to walk out of the theater to catch my breath. But. Other characters in The Sandlot.
The kid with the glasses that fakes being like,
Squints?
Mm-hmm. That fakes drowning. That was pretty funny.
So again, and full disclosure, I'm not a child psychiatrist. Right, so we're going to have to take some creative liberty and develop these characters and perhaps see them as adults down the road. If Squints were to present to you with, let me think. I'm trying to think of how an adult Squints might actually present. I have an idea, but I don't want to go there just yet. Let's say a pervasive pattern of behavior in which he continues to get in trouble. What might be one of the things that pops up in the differential diagnosis for you?
Conduct disorder.
Conduct, but he's older now.
So antisocial.
Yeah, so let's make them. It's easier for me to talk about them in terms of adults. Antisocial personality disorder is defined by the cardinal trait of having a blatant disregard for and violation of others' rights, which he does. And if this behavior were to persist into adulthood and it became clinically significant, if it came to clinical attention, I think that cluster B personality disorders is a strong consideration. That said, a couple of just pearls for your exam. Number one, because antisocial personality does in fact adhere to a cardinal trait, when you study for this personality disorder for your shelf exam, be assured that all you have to do in reviewing those diagnostic criteria is convince yourself that they are mere examples of that cardinal feature. It's much easier to learn in that way, right? So every bullet that you read, look at that cardinal feature, easily convinced, yet another example. And it becomes that more easily identifiable on a shelf. Right? And that's common practice, that's good practice in preparing for all of the personality disorders, of which you're going to tell me the other three that make up this same cluster. This is cluster B.
Histrionic.
Histrionic personality. What is the cardinal feature here?
Like attention seeking.
Are we going to leave this in a differential for Squints or not so likely? I wish I could turn the camera on and show everybody the faces that are being you guys are making at me. You're struggling with this. What do you think? Hey, listen, here's a clinical pearl, right? This is not going to help you on the shelf at all. If you have this crossing your mind, like the way I'm reading your faces, the answer is yes, keep it in. It's the best to go conservatively, keep it in, and if you're wrong, fine, you'll rule it out a week from now, right? Another cluster B personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, also adhering to a cardinal trait, which is what? Arrogance, grandiosity, belief they're special, and that they cannot be understood by others that are not as special as they are. Right? Yes or no here? A much quicker no. Right? So, no. And then finally, the fourth and final cluster B personality.
Borderline.
Yeah, borderline personality. So unfortunately, borderline personality does not have a cardinal trait. So here you're going to have to review the DSM criteria in more detail in preparation for your shelf exam. And we'll get to that through discussion of another film. So we'll just name it right now, and then we'll learn it in more detail on a future Thursday. Questions about any of the cluster B? Brief introduction to those 4 personality disorders. Any other observations with squints? No? Who else you got?
There's Benny, who's like the perfect character.
Yeah, Benny's an interesting character because until the second half of the movie, we wouldn't even consider him to be one of the primary protagonists. But the way in which this movie develops, we're kind of sucked in by Scotty. But then in the second half of the film, it's not Scotty, it's actually Benny that's the primary protagonist. So it's an interesting dynamic of the film. Any thoughts about Benny?
He's kind of like the leader of the group.
He does emerge as the clear leader, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
He was like unrealistically like perfect. Like he was the most athletic, the kindest. Like I don't know, it was like a realistic portrayal.
And it almost, actually, let me take a step back. I think there's a reason for that. Anybody?
I guess because the film's from like Scotty.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. Which then does bring up another issue here. Observation, I think, is on target with regard to why, beyond the obvious, which is he looked up to him, right? And Scotty was vulnerable because of his having been the new kid. But I think there's a dynamic even beyond that as to why Scotty would have such an idealized version or image of Benny.
Maybe because he didn't really have like a male like father figure.
He definitely was vulnerable. There's no doubt he was looking for that.
He was looking for his stepdad to like teach him how to play catch, and Benny was sort of the one that did that for him.
Definitely a surrogate. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they mentioned this. He may have actually been a year older too, which is a big deal when you're that age. It's like it's an old man. You know, there's a very, very subtle allusion to this, and I'm not so sure it was truly meaningful, but it's something worth discussion. And that is that Benny might actually look at himself as an outcast. Right? He may not feel completely comfortable fitting in his neighborhood. Right? Any reasons why? It's alluded to. Very subtle, though.
Is it his ethnicity?
Yeah. Yeah. And inasmuch, he may have discovered baseball as an outlet, a way to become accepted, a way to fit in himself, which means that his story then parallels Scotty. Now, Scotty, we think of a physical move, right? His family actually moved, and they're a new family. He's a new kid in town. But I think there's a similar feeling that's shared, and I think Scotty taps into that. Right? In either case, we have two characters. Again, remember, these are the two main protagonists. One is introduced in the beginning of the film. The other one, a bit of a surprise introduction towards the end of the film or in the second half of the film. Both deal with inner conflict and are able to resolve it in the same way. How would Sigmund Freud say that each of these kids resolve that inner conflict of feeling as if they're an outcast? By the way, if everybody here has now watched The Sandlot, if you go back now and watch Stephen King's It, eerie parallel. Right? Not nearly the fun coming of age, but both are coming of age movies of kids coming together and finding their way in a neighborhood. So there's creepy. I mean, one's in California, the other one is in the East Coast, of course, in Maine. But watching it is a strange experience after you've seen The Sandlot. Especially with the voiceover at the very end, which I want to get to in a little bit, in terms of how they turned out, because it's very similar to the second half of it at Chapter 2. We find out how these adults actually turn out. So, again, very, very eerie parallel here. But getting back to the question.
Are you talking about like their relationship with their mom, or are you talking about like more like super ego?
Yeah. So anxiety is going to be alleviated by the ego, and specifically the ego defense mechanisms. And I think both of these boys actually choose, not that it's a conscious choice, the same defense. What do we call it when an inner conflict and therefore anxiety is addressed through something that is an artistic form?
Sublimation.
Yeah, both sublimate. Baseball's a form of sublimation for them. Yep. So, very interesting characters, parallel wonderfully. And again, we're talking about the primary and then secondary protagonists. Or actually, I'm sorry, the first and later primary protagonists, more accurately. Any final thoughts on either Scotty or Benny?
I think that I didn't think of it like that in the sense that Benny was also trying to like fit in, but now that you mention it, reminds me of the scene where Benny like tells Scott to like wear jeans and like put on his cap, and that very much aligns with like this subtle idea of fitting in. So it makes a lot of sense now.
Yeah. And again, this is speculation, and this would be in the prequel. It's a very brief allusion to it, but that's allusion to it. But if there, it does really unite these characters. What other characters do you want to discuss? The Sandlot.
I was thinking for Benny, I thought it was interesting how the other team came when they had that game, and like the other team even admitted, even though they were like bullying the Sandlot kids, that Benny was good enough to play for them. I thought like it was interesting. Like, why doesn't Benny like play with them in a more organized team? But yeah, I guess I could sort of point to the motivation.
Yeah, it's a great observation. Yeah, and I don't know the answer. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But there's a reason why. There's clearly, it's not just a circumstance that, oh, well, he just didn't. There's much more to it than that. Mm-hmm. What would be really interesting is if there was a notion of that earlier in the film, and that notion was squashed upon the introduction of Scotty to the group. That would have made things even more interesting. But again, as a psychiatrist, I don't want to look too much into things. Let's talk about the recluse. Let's imagine for a second that while the town lore about him is in fact fiction, we're going to maintain that. Some of the stuff that he talks about upon having those boys come into the home turn out to be false. All right. Never played in, the major leagues, any of the professional leagues. Beyond just having an audience and lying, what are some things we might want to consider here? At this point, I'm not going to address his eyesight. Let's say for now that's irrelevant. Well, how about being a recluse? Now, when Scotty initially talks with him and they actually have a conversation, is this character someone that appears to be conflicted because he is not interacting with other people, or does he feel very content in living in isolation?
Content.
Content? And if that's the case, if he were to present on a shelf exam, what would be the single best answer?
Schizoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, for someone who maybe has a provisional diagnosis of schizoid personality disorder, there are some things that he says which then, when not validated, conform to his being eccentric. Might there be another condition to consider now, too? Somebody who's emotionally and physically distant is content with that emotional distance, doesn't mind living the life of a recluse, but it also has an eccentricities of behavior too. Yeah, yeah. Again, this assumes that a lot of what he tells Scotty and Benny are just false. Now, there's a differential diagnosis for that too, but taking his living in isolation as a presenting sign. Schizotypal personality is a consideration. Now, you've named 2 of the 3 cluster A personalities. What is the one that you're missing?
Paranoid?
Yeah. Yeah. All 3 really do conform to a cardinal trait. The paranoid personality disorder, and I don't see any of the characters in the Sandlot being paranoid or having the paranoid personality disorder. But there, the individual will demonstrate a pervasive distrust or suspiciousness of others. The schizoid personality, as you mentioned, will be a person who feels comfortable living in isolation. And when that cardinal trait has the added feature of some eccentricity, you're thinking schizotypal personality disorder.
So what will we make of him, like, actively inviting them into his home and talking to them and giving them baseball? Because it seemed like he almost really enjoyed having them over.
Yeah, and that would certainly counter or go against schizoid personality. The schizoid personality, we would want to see, if we wanted to make this clinically accurate, his actually increased anxiety with anyone, including those characters coming into the home. Yeah. Which is why ultimately, that's why I had to add the fact that maybe he's eccentric too.
Right.
So. Final thoughts, The Sandlot. Anything else you guys want to cover this afternoon?
It's a good movie. Wasn't the first time watching it.
Agree. Yep. No one wants to talk about Hercules? All right, we'll leave it there. I'm pretty sure I'll post this on X in a couple hours, but I think I'm leaning towards a Nightmare on Elm Street for next Thursday. All right, so, but I'll post that to confirm.